Okay, this is the grade 7 correction of their final test in chapter 4 on fractions, decimals, and percents. This is the answers to all of the questions that were on your summative final. The first question, question 1 says 5% is equal to 0.5, true or false? Well, it says for all of these questions, you have to, if it's true, you have to show why, and if it's false, you have to change it to the correct answer. So in this case, the answer is false, so I have to prove why it is false. Now 5% is 5 out of 100, which is 500ths, which if I was to write as a decimal, is 0.05. So clearly, this is 5/10ths, which is actually 50%. So there's two things you could have said. You could have said that, 5/10ths, which is 0.5, is equal to 50%, or you could have said 5% is equal to 500ths, which is 0.05. Either way, you're showing why it's false. Question 2 says 10% of $64.80 is less than. Remember, if what you just read, so I just read this, and if it's not eating what I just said, you must read this symbol as less than. Right? If it was eating it, I would say it's greater than. So 10% of $64.80 is less than 20% of $32.50, true or false? Well, now I have to show my work. I have to show what 10% of $64.80 is and what 20% of the other one is as well. So for 10%, I know that I take my decimal and I move it one place over. So 10% is $6.48. 20% is really 10% times 2, right? So 10% is $3.25, because I move my decimal one place over. So therefore, and I'll use my symbol therefore, 3 little dots, 20% would be double that, which is $6.50. Okay, so now we can put down $6.48 is less than $6.50. Is this true? Yes, it is. So we circle true. Now remember, there's a lot of work I had to put into that to prove that it was true. Question 3 says this fraction represents 55% of the shape. Well, true or false? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first say what fraction this is. And this fraction is 3/5. Okay, because it's 5 parts and 3 of them are shaded in. 3/5 as a percentage, there's 2 ways you can do it. The first way is you can create an equivalent fraction that has 100 as a denominator. In this case, 5 times 20 is 100. So if I multiply my numerator by 20, I get 60 out of 100, and therefore it's 60%. So since I know that 3/5 of the shape is shaded in, and it says this fraction represents 55, the answer is false, because it actually represents 60%. Now the other pathway I could have taken is 3/5. I could have converted it to a decimal by dividing my numerator by my denominator. If I take my calculator here, 3 divided by 5 is 0.6, and 0.6 is 6/10ths, which is 60/100ths, which is 60%. Both pathways prove that 3/5 is 60%. So the answer is false. Question 4 says if a $100 TV set is discounted 15%, but 15% HST is charged on the new price, the cost will still be $100. So here's how you prove true or false. I'm going to take my $100 and I'm going to find, well, what is 15% of $100? So there's 2 ways you can do it. You can do it mentally. 10% is $10 because I moved the decimal one place over. 5% would be half of 10%, so therefore it would be $5. So therefore, 15% would be adding those 2 together, which is $15. Now that would be what the discount is. So then I take my $100 TV and I subtract the 15% discount, and now we get the new price would be $85. Okay? So if there's a 15% discount, that means I would save $15, and the discounted price would be $85. But it then says 15% HST is charged on the new price. So then I have to find out, well, what is 15% of $85? Now this one doesn't lend itself very well to being a mental math question. Instead of doing it mental math, and you're allowed to use your calculator, I'm going to say, well, 15% of $85 to a calculator would look like that, because 15% is 15 over 100, which is 15/100ths. And we always said that the word of in mathematics is usually thought of as being a multiplication. So if I use a calculator for this, put my calculator here, I go 15%. Oh, that's not 15%. 15% of $85, which is the sale price. So the tax, or the HST, on this will be $12.75. So you take your $85 discounted TV and you add $12.75, and you get $97.75. That is the sale price, or that is the new price, which is not $100. So if you go back to our question, it'll still be $100. The answer is false. The new price will be $97.75. Question 5, over half the class got it wrong. And it really has to do with the idea of terminating decimals, IMALS, versus repeating decimals. All right. So if I take my calculator and I go 2 divided by 3, I change it to, oh, that's not divided by, 2 divided by 3. That's how I could change this fraction, 2/3, to a decimal. It's 2 divided by 3. And my calculator says it's 0.6666, and then it keeps going to infinity. In fact, if you look right here, the last digit in my calculator is 7, and that's not because it is a 7. That's because the calculator can't show you the next digits, which are all 6s, and it rounded up that last 6 to become a 7, just to let you know that the next digit would have been greater than 5. So this is what we call a repeating decimal, okay? Now those 6s never end, and this little thing right here called an ellipsis, that just says that this continues the way it does forever. But what we learned in math is that instead of saying ... we actually could take our number and put a line above the digit that is repeating forever, in this case the 6. And 2/3 is actually equal to 0.6 repeating. Now because this doesn't show a ... and there is no bar notation, this is actually tenths, 100,000, it's 10,000, it's 100,000. This is actually 666,666 millionths, right? It's a terminating decimal. And a terminating decimal means a decimal that ends. And most of the decimals that we've ever dealt with are decimals that end. For example, a half is equal to 0.5. This is a decimal that ends. It doesn't repeat the 5 forever. Whereas 2/3, if I look at it, it does repeat at 6 forever, and therefore it's repeating, and we use bar notation. So the answer for this one is false. And if you said true and you proved it, I still only took off 1 mark out of the 2 because it was kind of a trick question. So was question 6. It says 23 out of 40, and this symbol that we talked about means approximately. Right? It's approximately. So we'll say, well, 20 out of 40 is really 50%. So if I'm thinking 23 out of 40, you know what? That's probably pretty darn close to 55%, even though I don't know what it is. And a lot of people didn't use that logic. They went to their calculator and went 23 divided by 40, and it told them 57.5%. So it said it's 57.5%. And they're saying, well, that's not 55%, but that's not what it says. It doesn't say it's equal to. It says approximately equal to. And therefore, this is true, because 55% is pretty close to 57.5% of the actual answer. Question 7, a lot of students didn't read properly. It says, my math class has 32 students. 18 are girls. What percent of the class are boys? So the first thing you have to do is figure out, well, how many boys are in the class? So if the class is 32 students and 18 are girls, if I subtract that, I get 60. Oh, I better borrow here. I borrowed wrong. I get 14 boys in this class. 14 boys. So 14 boys out of a class of 32 students is the fraction that represents the boys in that class. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my calculator. I'm going to take this fraction, actually bring it over here. I'm going to take my calculator, and I'm going to go 14 divided by 32. I'm going to change the fraction to a decimal, and that is 0.4375. Okay? Now that is roughly 4,375, 4,375 10,000ths, if you want to think of it as a fraction. Which if I divide by 100, I will create an equivalent fraction out of 100. So 10,000 divided by 100 is 100. And if I divide this by 100, I'm going to get 43.75 out of 100, which means what percent of the class are boys? 43.75% of the class are boys. And I'll put boys, simple boys, looks like this. All right, girls would be 56.25, but that's not what the question was asking. Okay, question number 8 says, what decimal is this point? So if we look at this, we have 1, 2, 3 parts that get me from 0 to 0.6. That means that each of these parts must be 0.2. Right? And I can just kind of put my numbers in just to make sure it does work out that way. And it does. So because each one is 2/10 of a distance, the answer for that decimal point is 0.2. Now question 9 is a little bit trickier. It says what mixed fraction, by the way this is 1.5, I didn't come out so well on that. What fraction is this point? So again, I have 1, 2, 3 points to go from 0 to 1.5. So that means that each of these points must be a half. And it works when I put it all in there. But it says what mixed fraction? So many people put that as their answer. But the answer is that is 2 5/10, which in lowest terms is 2.5. And that's the answer I was looking for right there. Question 10, what is larger, 1, 2, or 3? Well, we just talked about repeating decimals. So 0.6 with that bar notation is 0.66666 ... to infinity, right? 6/10 is just 6/10, so it's just 0.6, and that's a terminating decimal, which means the rest really would be zeros if I wanted to put them in. So this is definitely smaller than number 1. And the last one, 217 over 389, I need a calculator to figure out what decimal this is. So I'm going to convert it by taking my numerator, dividing it by my denominator, and that gets me 0.55. I'm going to round up to 8, right, roughly. So all 3 of these change to decimals. I can clearly see now that this is the larger number of all 3 of them. This is the second largest, and this is the smallest. So the answer is 1 is the largest. But remember, you had to prove why. So I had to show all that work. Question 11 says, a textbook costs $68.40. What is the total cost of the book if you have to include 15% HST? Now, there's a couple students that actually subtracted 15% from $68.40. That's not tax. That would be a discount, which is different than HST. HST stands for Harmonized Sales Tax, which actually is a provincial sales tax, which is in our PEI, I think is 10%. And it also includes a GST, which is a government sales tax, but the federal, which I think is 5%. And when you add these together, you get what's a new tax called an HST. And this just came in a couple of years ago. Well, not a couple of years ago, it's 5 years ago. And it's meant to simplify the tax system. But I think a lot of people are kind of not very happy with it because things that weren't taxed before are now taxed at a higher rate. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to use a calculator for this. So 15% of 68.40, we're going to change 15%. 15% is 15 hundredths, which as a decimal is still 15 hundredths of 68.40. We're going to take our calculator and we're going to go 15%. Oh, that's not 15%. 15% of $68.40 is $10.26. Now this is the tax. This is the HST. So the last step we have to do is take our $68.40, which is the price of our textbook, and add on the $10.26 HST. So I'm going to add on to that $68.40. And the final price of our textbook will be $78.66. Now notice all the work I showed here, right? I didn't just have the answer. I showed all of this work because I had to show my thinking. Especially if you used a calculator, I needed to see that. Question 12 says, Will and Ethan are the star players on their basketball teams. Will shoots 125 free throws and makes 114 of them. So as a fraction, Will would take 114, make 114 out of 125. Ethan makes 72 out of 80 free throws. So the first thing we had to do was realize that we have two fractions to start with. Will has 114 out of 125, out of 225, 125. And Ethan has 72 out of 80. So I'm going to use my calculator. I'm going to change both of these to decimals by dividing my numerator by my denominator. So 114 divided by 125 is 0.912, which is 912 tenths, hundredths, thousandths. 912 thousandths, which is equal to 91.2 over 100. And therefore, it's 91.2%. So Will is a really good free throw shooter. 91.2% is a pretty good free throw percentage. Ethan, on the other hand, made 72 divided by 80. So as a decimal, his is 0.9 as a decimal, which is 9 tenths, which is 90 hundredths, which is 90%. So Ethan's still a very good free throw shooter at 90%, but Will is the better free throw shooter at 91.2%. Question 13, an old model of iPhone is discounted 40% if the original price was $800. What is the new sale price? Well, let's do it mentally this time. Let's just use our mental math, because 40% is not a hard one to use mentally. So let's start with 10% of the $800 iPhone. 10%, we know that if we take the decimal, in this case the decimal is right here, and we move it one place over, we get 10%. So 10% is actually $80. And therefore, 10% multiplied by 4 equals 40%. If I take my $80, which is 10%, and I multiply that by 4, I will get $320. Now that's the discount. That's not the sale price, that's the discount. So he says, listen, you buy this $800 iPhone, I'll save you $320, which is 40%. So you take your $800 iPhone and you subtract the discount, and you get a new price of $480. And that's the answer I was looking for. Question 14 says, for questions 14 and 22, you use mental math strategies to solve. Here's the important part. Show all of your reasoning. So 50% is half. Half of $26 is 13. That's all I needed to show. Or I could have done something like $26 divided by 2, which is really how you would get half. That's also 13. But either way, your answer is $13. 25%, we know that it's half of half. So 50% is $60. So 25% would be half of that, which is $30. Notice the work I showed. I've defined what 25% is, and then I went and showed how I got there by figuring out half, and then half of that. Question 16 is 10%. Now 10%, you move the decimal. So in this case, my decimal's right here. So 10%, I want to say move the decimal one place left. So if I move it one place left, I'd get $4.59. Actually, I get an extra zero there, but since we're dealing with money, I don't need that zero anymore, and the answer is $4.59. Question 17, 5%. So half of 10% is 5%. So to get 10%, I'm going to move my decimal one place over. I don't think I can. But if I move it one place over, 10% is $8.80. So 5% would be half of that, which is $4.40. Half of 10%. Question 18, a lot of people got this wrong. It's my own fault. I won't do it next time. But 24,100, in French, we use the comma for decimals, but in English, we use the comma to separate groupings of 3 place values. So in between the hundreds and the thousands and the millions, we use commas to separate them. So this is really $12,400. So some people write it as being $24 and then, I don't know, 10 cents, but it's not. So for 1%, the rule is move your decimal twice. So the decimal's really here. So once, twice would give me a 1% value of $241. So if you moved it from there, you got like, I don't know, something ridiculous, but the answer should be $241. Question 19, here's how you prove it. You say that 45% is 50%, take away 5% equals 45%, right? So 50% is half, so 50% would be $140. 5%, well 10% is $28. So 5% would be half of that, which is that's not a 4, which is $14, half of 28. So you add those two together, or sorry, subtract those two to get 45%, and you get $126. Question 20 says 15%, so 15% is equal to 10% plus 5%. 10%, I know I moved my decimal over one spot, so I get $4.84. 5% is half of that, so that would be $2.42. So altogether, when I add those, make sure when you add them without a calculator, you line up your decimals. Drop your decimal down, you get $7.26. Question 21 is 9%, and 9%, the easiest way to get it would be 10% take away 1%. 10%, if you move your decimal over one place, would be $4.8, but since we're dealing with money, we'll call it $4.80. Take away 1% means you move the decimal twice. So one time is 4.80, two times would be 48 cents. Now some people had a difficult time doing this on paper, so line up your decimals. I got to subtract here, so I got to borrow. I got 2, 3, drop your decimal, 4. Therefore, 9% is $4.32. 55%, it's 50% plus 5% equals 55%. 50% is half, so I'm going to get $600 for 50%. 10% is, move your decimal over, $120. So therefore, 5% would be half of that, which is $60. You can add those together. 55% is $660. Question 23 to 26 says use a calculator to solve. Okay, so what is 8% of $12? So for a calculator, you're going to go 8%, which is 8 hundredths. A lot of people put 8 tenths. This is not this. No, it is 0.08, 8%, 8 hundredths, right? Of 12. That's what you had to do. You had to multiply those two together. And if you use your calculator, decimal 0.8 times 12 is 0.96. 35% is 0.35. So 35% of is multiplication of 120. Take my calculator. 35% of 120. Oh, backspace. 120 is 42. 2%, same as the other question. 2% is 2 hundredths, not 2 tenths, which means it's 0.02 of 315.4. Take my calculator, decimal 02 times 315.4 is 6.308. That's your answer for 25. And 26 is 0.98 times 714, 98% of 714. So 98% of 714 is 699.72. That's your answer for question 26. Now the last one says change, change all of these to fractions, decimals. So the first fraction we're given is 3/20ths, and we're asked to make it into a decimal. So the only way we can do that is by creating an equivalent fraction that has either a 10 or 100 or 1,000 as a denominator. So because I know that 20 times 5 is 100, I can create an equivalent fraction by multiplying my numerator by 5, and I get 15 hundredths. 15 hundredths is written as 0.15 because tenths and hundredths. And as a percent, 15 out of 100 would be 15%. The next one's pretty easy. All you have to do is know your place value. And 0.7 is 7 tenths, which is your answer as a fraction. But in order to get a percentage, you have to be able to create an equivalent fraction with a 100 denominator. In this case, 10 times 10 is 100, and 7 times 10 is 70, which makes this 70%, not 7%. And the last one, 8% as a fraction is 8 over 100. That's the easiest question there, so that's technically correct, but you can reduce it to lowest terms. I'm going to reduce it to a different fraction, which is 4/50. That's still correct, but I can reduce it by a factor of 2 again, and I get 2 over 25 as a lowest terms fraction for 8%. And finally, as a decimal, 8%. In order to make it as a decimal, I'd like to have my denominator 10, 100, or 1,000. This fraction is over 100, and it's 8 hundredths, which means that 8 hundredths is 0.08. Okay, that was a 26-minute video on your test for grade chapter 4. Please make sure you've made all your necessary corrections from the mistakes you made on the test and pass it in to me the day after you watch this video. If you have any questions, please make sure you see me.